Today's presentation will probably be one of the most politically incorrect speeches I have ever done. I kid you not. And I don't mean politically correct in terms of politics. I mean politically correct in terms of the church. Because as a result of a breakfast I had with Mike Riddle last year here from Answers in Genesis, and a number of other conversations with other talk show hosts, I have finally had it. Because someone pointed out, we've been on the air 20 years yapping about everything from where the country was going financially, what was happening to it sociologically, you name it, and it fell on deaf ears. People just weren't interested. Like Bill said, when we first started talking about this, even my friends were going, well, there goes John, you know. So, shucky-do. But I did get a comforting, encouraging email from Karen Merritt. Anybody remember Karen Merritt? She was a Channel 2 weather lady here for a long time in Denver. And she emailed me last week and she said, you know, it's ironic. Everything you were talking about on the radio 20 years ago is coming true now. My job, what we do on our radio show is we're an early warning service. We want to tell you, we want to stay 24, 48, 70 months out. So when the subprime mortgage crisis hit, for us this was old news. We began talking about it in 2004 and describing to people what it was going to do, where you needed to move, what you needed to do, and the downshot. This is a presentation far too big for a single session. We're probably going to finish this one in Tempe, Arizona, so I'm going to do this in reverse. Okay, we're calling this one The Road Back. It's part 2 of Over the Edge. And I've decided that we're going to start in reverse. I feel very much, as we do these 2 sections, I feel very much like Bilbo Baggins did There and Back Again, you know. But we're back again and then going there. We have to do about 10 minutes of a background, and then I'm really going to chug. And I apologize if I have to move fast, but there's just a lot of material to get in, and it's like trying to give you a drink from a fire hydrant. You get what you want, just a lot of it. That's all. All right. The world's going through a global paradigm shift right now. There are 2 aspects to it. We have a global situation. We're converting ourselves into global pantheistic socialism. And the United States is approaching within the next 48 to 60 months what we call a 4th turning generational crisis. Every time a society hits a 4th turning crisis, this was a term created by Professor Strauss and Howe in their book, The 4th Turning, about 13 years ago, in which they accurately predicted the turning beginning here in about 2007. This is when a society has to make a decision. Either it's going to reform what's wrong, and we never go back. No society ever goes back to where it was. But they do manage to fix things and become stronger and move forward, or they tip over the edge into a lot of chaos and usually a change of government, and that's not necessarily good. And that is driven by the pressures of society, and I don't care how big the government is or how big the country. The Roman Empire went through very much of the same thing. Brief look at Revelation and everything. Remember that the end-time system has 3 components: economic, political, and religious. Even though in the West, in Western countries, we have separation of these systems, they have to interact. You cannot have any system of government or people without these 3 systems. And of course, religion also involves worldview. This was the system in the Old Testament when they had a theocracy. It is the end-time system that is predicted. The Antichrist has his hands in all 3 things. And it's our system now. It's a system in the West. You cannot have a society without all of these things. 10 years ago, I did a presentation called Antichrist Doesn't Wear Tights, because I began to notice this gap between what prophecy teachers were teaching and the paradigm shifts we were going through. They were always looking at Israel, they were looking at certain key issues internationally, but they were missing the whole game was going on right before their faces as they were watching. So that's why I did that presentation. I said Antichrist isn't going to appear in Washington or Whitehall if you're in Great Britain or wherever your capital has to be, wearing red spandex tights, horns, and a tail and saying, "Hi, I'm Antichrist, worship me." Okay? This just wouldn't fly. This is a process of deception. And that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, is the new consensus process, the whole concept of formalized deception, which is now riddled Western countries and is endemic in everything from government to education to the churches. And that's why we're getting slaughtered. All right? So we know ultimately that Antichrist winds up with a very long vacation in Mexico in a place called Lago de Fuego. Hey, that's good. Most of you got that, you know. For those of you whose Spanish isn't too good, it means lake of fire. All right, let's take a quick review of what we're really going to face here over the next 70 months. I know this is being given to people in the United States. I also know that people outside in the other parts of the English-speaking world will see this. A lot of these things will apply to you. We are going to have severe shortages in three key areas, all right? Energy, food, and water. And the one that I really want to talk about is energy, because this is going to take this so-called economic recovery and just push it sideways, right off the road. And very few people see this coming right now. It's going unnoticed by the media. Our own government is actually trying to suppress dissemination of this information. There was only one study done, and it was defunded after that, so that people would not be talking about this. What am I talking about? I'm talking about a thing called peak oil. Now, peak oil does not mean the world is out of oil. It means the world is out of cheap oil, and that the world demand on a daily basis is growing so fast, and we're doing so little to improve production and extraction, that at some point these two curves are going to cross. That sometime is next year, 2011. And that means that more and more on a day-to-day basis we will have X million barrels of oil shortage. Now, most of these studies that are being done, two have been done in the United Kingdom, one in either Bahrain or Kuwait. The German military, their study just got leaked, and Der Spiegel ran the article on it a couple of weeks ago, and the Pentagon has done an internal study as well, and they're all saying this goes critical about 2014 or 2015. The reason for that is, number one, we're not increasing production. Number two, China and India are booming, growing economies, and they are consuming more and more. Now, as we look at this, this is going to have an incredible impact on the world economy. And as I said, very few people notice it, except for the country of China. This is the amazing part about China. Because China has recognized that there's a storm coming. It's tying up excessive contracts with oil-producing countries around the world. It has cornered the market on rare earth minerals. And you don't think rare earth minerals are important? You know, all these alternative energies, solar, wind, everything they're telling you is going to replace oil as a fuel in the near future. You need rare earths to have the technology to make all of that work. Computer screens and all of these things related to high tech require rare earths. They only come from a limited number of places, and China now has the corner on the production of it. They are also stockpiling the majority of the world's annual production of uranium for powering nuclear reactors. Why don't we see a shortage? Because right now we're processing a lot of the old plutonium and other uranium stocks from the former Soviet Union, and that's what's going into the world's supply. All right? But that's going to end next year, and all of a sudden we're going to discover there's a limited amount of uranium made every year, and there will be a shortage of that. We will not have any lack of crises over the next 70 months. Everybody says, well, it's already started. I said, you haven't seen anything yet. This is going to be. Now, I will say one thing, all right? If you notice, well, I'm shaking, but that's because I'm talking in public. That's all right. I'm not worried about this because God will get us through this. This is what this talk is all about, all right? By 2014, the United States, we're going to talk about just our country, will be in a lot of pain, a lot more than it is now. We're going to enter phase 2 of this recession. It really is a depression. We are headed smack into a credit crisis because the dollar is beginning to teeter and totter left and right as its credit worthiness worldwide becomes very short. It'll be in the style of Greece. It will most likely come to us by way of Japan. This will lead to a collapse of the dollar and a substitution of a new global currency as the discussion underway right now. They don't know what they'd call it, the globo. I said, why don't you call it the zero? It won't be worth anything, you know. So the one thing you do have to understand, and I was talking with Tom Cloud about this before I started in, is the fact that what you hear coming out of the powers that be is misinformation at best and lies at worst. They're simply not telling you what is happening. You have to go to other sources to find out. The other sources, by the way, some of the real hard ones, all the way from the peak oil issue to the economic crisis, did accurately predict all of this. So they know what they're talking about. Who saw the subprime mortgage debacle coming? All right, you could see this coming. We knew that it was going to run out. It was a bubble that was driven by excess liquidity. It was going to blow. It was going to blow bad. And we knew that the value of houses were going to go right down through the mortgages. We said as much. if you were watching, you did it. But every day on CNBC and Fox Business, oh, well, it's this and that, and it's up, and yeah, the whole bit. So that's the first part. We're going to see a whole panoply of new taxes that are going into effect here. If you want to get less of something, tax it. I don't know why we think that taxes breed prosperity. This is a progressive socialist myth. No country has ever taxed its way into prosperity, but they have taxed their way into oblivion. The Roman Empire did just that. We're going to see new taxes next year if we don't handle the Bush tax cuts properly, which kept us from dipping into this recession about 5 years earlier. All right. We're also going to see all new taxes connected with Obamacare. Small business in this country is panicked. They are literally not hiring. And remember, small business creates 90% of the jobs in our country. They're not hiring because they don't know what the heck is going to happen next. They're being threatened with all new regulations and taxes, and that's why there isn't any recovery. You notice this? And it doesn't make any difference how much money you spend. It's not going to get us to recover until we get people back to work. The trade deficit is leading us towards a horrible disaster. And the end result of everything is politicians have to keep the game going. You see, there's a way you can land an airplane. You can land it under control. Maybe there's an engine on fire, but you can still get it back on the ground safely. Or you can take it into the ground out of control. When planes land in controlled flight, people survive. When planes hit the ground in uncontrolled flight, people die. It works that way. Now, what's the problem? Historically, just as in the Roman Empire, the politicians try to keep the economic game going as long as possible. And so what they have to do is they have to thrash around looking for any assets they can protect for their citizens, all right? And 4 years ago we were saying, watch the private pensions. There's a huge amount of money in private pension funds right now that's going to be too much for the government not to try to get a hold of. And sure enough, last year or the year before, you hear this discussion about, well, these times are uncertain. People really can't manage their own money. Look at what happened when the subprime went out. We need to sort of nationalize the pension plans. Now, what they'll do is they'll make you invest the plans in government paper, which is really an IOU guaranteed by nothing. Okay? And we all know how secure Social Security and Medicare are right now. It'll be the same thing. So they're talking about a VAT tax, another new series of taxes. And the final tax, which every country always goes into, is they destroy their own currency. And they destroy their own currency by inflating it, by debasing it, taking the silver content out, printing more of it. When you hear quantitative easing, that means printing more money. That's a euphemism. It's a different mechanism. So that's where we're headed right now, is inflating the money supply. Historically, when nations get to this point, they go through a series of crises. Wanton spending, socialism, the idea that there is a free lunch and that you can transfer wealth and that there is something for nothing, always leads us to this. In the Roman Empire, it did. They gave the people in Rome bread and circuses. They made the people outside of Rome pay for it all. Okay? This bankrupted the entire system. That causes the nation, because of the inflation, to go through a currency crisis, because the powers that be just can't resist keeping the game going. That leads to an economic crisis, which leads to a social crisis as the people rebel and take evasive action. That's where we're headed right now. We're actually walking down the very same road that the Roman Empire walked around a long time ago. This is all background briefing before we get to the important material. We are going to face hard economic times. Food and energy are not going to dry up. You should be preparing for shortages, and that's a subject for a different talk. Everybody needs to start building up their pantry, because there will be shortages and interruptions at some time in the next 70 months because of what I think we're going to go through. Government promises are going to fail. They're going to fail simply because of the fact that government won't be able to afford it. We're out of money. I mean, what part of we're $14 trillion in debt don't you understand? The unfunded liabilities is somewhere, according to Dr. Larry Kotlikoff, between $70 and $100 trillion. Of what we owe in Medicare, Social Security. These are impossible numbers, never happen, never be met. So at some point, the game is going to be over. Now, the conflict with this is that the hardcore progressives right now, they understand that this is their moment. They've been working at changing, they call it transforming the government of the United States for over 100 years, starting with Woodrow Wilson, who believed the Constitution needed to go because they didn't believe in personal rights and freedoms and things like that. The progressive socialists are like a rocket ship that's headed for the moon, only it doesn't have enough energy to make the whole trip. And they're going, we're going to go, we're going to go, we're going to go, and the engine burns out, and they're going, no, 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 no. Okay, and that's why you're seeing the tension now between this whole progressive socialist idea that we have in Washington versus the Tea Party. But that's just the first storm in this whole mix right now. They understand that this is where we are headed. In reality, we're being driven by all sorts of other situations. And we need to understand that the U.S. is going over a tipping point. It's going through that fourth generational crisis when we're going to have to decide what kind of government are we going to have. Are we going to go back to the government of freedom under the Constitution where it doesn't live and it doesn't breathe, but it means what it says? Or are we going to tip forward into a new government that's going to be required to contain the chaos that's going to result, the sociological chaos as a result of all the economic issues? So we're almost not going, I will say, we are not going to be able to avoid the economic crisis. We're just charging right into it, and they're not doing anything to stop it. So we're plowing into that. Currency crisis, it's pretty well on its way. But the thing that you need to understand now is that there is a new religious paradigm that has come about, is the way government sees it, and the way it's being enforced now through the secular state or states and even local governments. And this is important because we begin moving through this progressive series. The whole progressive system works on a series of thesis-antithesis. I'll just drop this in since the slide is up. And this is what you see going on today. And unless this whole dialectical process of consensus is gotten under control, unless more people in the Tea Party or more people in the church understand how the process, as we call it, the Delphi technique works, it is a process of organized deception to get people to move to new outcomes without them realizing they're going there. And they use crisis, like Saul Alinsky said, to move people to that predetermined outcome, even though the people who are making the move don't understand that they're being maneuvered to a new outcome. They think they're going there because they thought of that. And it works under, you'll hear transformational Marxists talk about three stages: traditional, transitional, and transformational. And traditional is where we started, was the form of government we had. Transitional is where we have bits of the old and bits of the new. But the real hardcore progressives, the real hardcore Alinskyites knew where we were going all along. They just can't tell you about that en route. And that's where we get into transformational, where we have a new type of government. And their vision was a top-down planned socialist economy, very much based on the same type of an economy that worked so well in the former Soviet Union. And so they use this back-and-forth process of thesis-antithesis. You come up with one idea, there's an idea that challenges it. These things fight, they form the next synthesis. There's a new challenging idea, and in reality, if you notice, all along, through a series of perceived crises or conflicts, you're being maneuvered to a new outcome. What is this going to do ultimately when we get to religion? First of all, you need to understand God will take care of us as we go. You know, never put your trust in man. It's so easy to do. Put your trust in the Lord. But having said that now, here's the new religious paradigm that the new form of government will look like. How do we know that? Because it's what all the secular elitists are discussing right now. I've just summed it up here. Religion should not make any absolute truth assertions because, you see, religions are responsible for all of the evil in the world, according to the secularist mindset. So they know they can't get rid of it. The Marxists tried to get rid of religion. We can't do that, so now religion will be permitted as long as it goes along with the new consensus. And as I've always said about the word consensus, there are two parts to that: con and census. You're being conned and asked to take leave of your senses, all right? So no religion should make truth assertions because religion is a matter of personal belief. Science is a matter of fact, they will tell you. Religion is a matter of belief. Number two, because religion causes disruption, you should keep it to yourself. Number three, since you should keep it to yourself, when you come into the public marketplace of ideas, you should obey the secularist ideas, the progressive ideas for how we behave, and you should not bring your private religious ideas into the marketplace of ideas. And ultimately, you must go along with the common consensus and compromise. The whole consensus process is a process of releasing your own belief systems and compromising with belief systems that are hostile to your system, which I would assume would be Christianity, okay? So I'll make that assumption. But that's what the new paradigm is going to do. How well do you think, first of all, Orthodox Judaism, second of all, real firm believers in Islam, and third of all, really dedicated Christians are going to get along in this new paradigm. You can see this conflict coming already, can't you? All right, so how do we get back from here? There is no way back. Good luck. You're on your own. So. By now you need to, now this is the guts of what I really want to get into today. This is where I get politically incorrect. By now you should have an acute sense of danger, and you'd be surprised how many Christians don't. I mean, the warning bells from economics to religion are flashing red, but church after church, it's like there's nothing going on, We've been losing 70% of our youth as a result of public education, losing them to the faith, for several decades. It's like nothing's going on. There's no reaction to this. You want to go up to a pastor and, hello, anything going on in there? All right. So what is the key to the road back? What got us where we are? Well, the key to the road back is education. Okay? Well, now don't you remember when whole language came in and they dropped phonetics for whole language? They said it really wasn't important how you spelled. It was just that you made an effort at it, this type of thing. But it really is education. And I'm going to lead you quickly through how we got where we are and then give you the solution to where it is. All right? We must take back, as an organized group of people in our own churches, the education of our youth. Period. All right? Period. Freedom is not free. It doesn't happen naturally. It's a fluke of history. We have a foundation in biblical truth. We have to hammer away at the cliches of secularists and progressives with factual truth, biblical truth, historical truth, and get rid of the cliches, the nonsense, and the revisionism. And the only way you do it is to keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. That's the old, I will not sit down, I will not shut up. So, what brought us to this point? See, I'm a baby boomer. I don't like to admit that, but when my daughter got married, I said, I'm not old enough to have a married daughter. This is not right, Mitch Wright, most of you don't know Mitch. Mitch and his wife, Michelle, were very active in the school battles that took place in Washington State before he retired from the Coast Guard. And he made a comment to me because they're very up on the whole dialectical consensus process and how this has riddled the church. As a matter of fact, they got thrown out of their church because when the consensus process came into their church in the form of church growth, they challenged it, and the loving pastor and elders pitched him out. Because why? Because they said, well, the Bible says this, and you're doing that? They said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And anybody who does challenge that, I'll talk about that in a sec, gets challenged. But he made a comment to me. He said the Gen X and Gen Y and the millennials, everybody that came after the baby boomers, there's like someone drew a line right down the middle between the generations. Those of us who are old enough, there it goes again, to remember this, noticed it. Even back in 1974, I was back at the college that I had gotten my associate's degree in, and one of the professors there, he said, John, we don't know what's happened. He said, the new group of kids, something's gone wrong. Because when your class came through, my gosh, you guys were all balls of fire. You knew where you were going, what you were going to do. All of a sudden, we began to hear you on the radio, and you were in commercials, and this and that. He said, something changed over 5 years. So we knew something had gone amok. We just didn't know what the amuckery was. All right, we couldn't put our finger on it. How did we get to this point between then and there? Once progressives got hold of education at the end of World War II, education ran steadily downhill. As Ken Roberts pointed out to me in Ken's case, Ken's here today, and his case, if you remember, went to the Supreme Court over having a Bible on his desk while he was teaching at school. And he pointed out the benchmark date's really probably 1964 when we threw God out of the schools. And what Christians should have asked at that time is, as we put God out of the schools, we should have asked, well, are you going to teach values then? I mean, you can't not teach the children values. What are you going to teach? But we didn't ask that. And instead, all of the progressive socialists who had started way back with John Dewey, and you could really take it all the way back to Hegel, and then B.F. Skinner with his operant conditioning, Maslow, Rogers, Bloom's taxonomy, and then Bill Spady with outcome-based education in the 70s, you began to see this constant shift in our youth, and public education declined. But it was very hard to tell that to parents because when they said public education, they kept thinking, well, it wasn't so bad when I was there. But they didn't realize it was going through that dialectical transformation that was going there. So what happened during that time? Here's what happened. We shifted the emphasis in education from fact-based to feeling-based. We went from critical didactic thinking to dialectical feeling. We went from educating individuals to collective groupthink. We went from dealing with reality to dealing with relationships. That's why the change, and that's why we have trouble today even in the church, and we have trouble correcting and reforming anything in the schools. It's why we are having this massive, angry debate nationally, because everyone, if you've noticed, is not really debating substantively. They're throwing cliches at each other. That's what they're doing right now. Why is there no sense of alarm? Well, the problem that we have is today's teachers in the public school system, Christian teachers included, and pastors in many churches are part of the Gen X and Gen Y generation. They were indoctrinated in the new think rather than in the traditional way that we had built the country upon and the way we had viewed the Scriptures. All of this, the biblical higher criticism that came out of the 19th century that really damaged Germany so bad that when Hitler came along, the church couldn't stand against it. We have the same thing in our country, which really started about 1933. We're about 75 years behind. So if you benchmark when the higher criticism came into Germany about 1850 and the rise of Hitler in 1930, we're about the same way off, all right? Public school today is in a state of bankruptcy. Our competitors in China and India are running circles around our educational system. They're gearing up for global competition. We're telling our kids competition is evil and we should all think collectively in group consensus. There's a night and day difference between these two things. The problem with turning the ship, as I said, is the pastors and elders and teachers are many times from the same generation. As Ken Ortiz one time mentioned when we had done doing a broadcast at his church, we were walking out, and every once in a while somebody says something that just gels everything that you've been thinking about. And he said a lot of pastors today are functionally illiterate. Yeah, they can read, they can write, but they have very little knowledge of church history, little knowledge of history, just even writing and reading and understanding what's going on, they're not there. The problem is that when you deal with teachers in this area, even Christian teachers in the public school system, they have been part of the problem in reforming how the church handles education. Because when a pastor in a church will attempt to do that, quite often the Christian teachers will threaten to leave. And why is that? Because they keep changing their worldviews. They keep flopping back and forth, and they're not even aware of the fact they're changing their worldviews between Sunday and Monday. When we deal with this issue of education, they perceive this as an attack on the group, on teachers. And I don't believe teachers go into teaching because they hate kids or want to do a bad job. But they don't understand. In order to get their teaching credential, they had to learn this consensus dialectical thinking. All right? And when they talk to you, it's amazing. Whenever I talk, a lot of times they'll come up and speak. Doggone it, I wish you could see this. I want to get a recorder sometime. If it's a teacher in Portland, Oregon, and a teacher from Jersey City, New Jersey, they come up and they start talking, and it's the same script. And they think this is from them. It's not. It's the same script. Why? Because it's part of this dialectical thing. So, what is the problem in turning the ship? The problem in turning the ship is the fact that they don't realize the ship needs to be turned and in how they process information. And between the baby boomers and the Gen Xers, as we went from reality to relationships, that's the difference between the two generations. Let me show you, I'm just going to give you an example. And the example is, here's a helmsman at a ship. Up ahead in the fog and mist is a big iceberg. First mate out here sees it. He runs into the wheelhouse and says, "Quick, turn the ship. All right, there's an iceberg so many leagues out, blah, blah, blah. Do it now." And the helmsman goes, he has to do a double check. "What, are you sure? I don't see it from it. Take my word from it. I saw it through the fog bank." "Okay, I'll take your word for it." Flip, over it goes. Why? Because his concept is that we have to turn the ship, and that it's for the safety of the ship. Now, if you run into a Gen Xer, in many areas, I do this over and over again. I poke them, like on Facebook, I poke them with something to see how they're going to react. The first mate runs in, he says, "Turn the ship, there is an iceberg ahead." Are you saying that I'm a bad helmsman? Okay. No! But there's an iceberg ahead, we're all going to die. You know, you really shouldn't lose your temper because this is damaging our relationship. Then you get up in his face, "Turn the doggone ship!" Okay? And he looks at you and says, "Now you're invading my personal space." You think I'm kidding you. All right? I have had this repeated to me over and over again, and it's not their fault, it's how they were raised. Now, there is a solution to this, and that's the solution we're taking right now. You shoot the helmsman, okay? Well, I guess we can't go around shoot. That's not a good idea to shoot people, you know. But I think you understand what I mean. You cold smack him, right? Pow! Okay? You know, he's out of the equation. You grab the wheel and you do what you have to do to turn the ship. That's where those of us who have been fighting this battle for 20 years have finally arrived. I can't tell you how many hours of arguments and dialogues. Oh, I hate that word dialogue. And how much I have dialogued with people to try to get them to turn the doggone ship. All right? And many of you sense that in your own churches. All right? So many of us are moving on, and the church has to lead the way. And I just want to ask Christian teachers by one way. All right? Christian teachers need to snap into reality. They really do. Stop telling me it's not that bad. All right? Because they need to understand where it is. A good percentage of Christian teachers, when you start giving them the info, it's like scales come off their eyes. They go, oh my gosh, you're right. The other half are so mad they could spit bullets at you. All right? So, and I keep hearing from them, well, it's not that bad. And I keep saying, wait a minute, if it's not that bad, how come when kids come out of high school, they have lost their faith, they can't read, spell, or do math well, they know very little, and what they do know is politically correct fact and history, if it's history at all. They think dialectically, collectively, and in these compartmentalized values, and they doubt the freedom of value. They love socialism. They don't like the founding documents, and they just, at worst, hate their own country or don't understand why it's something worth fighting for. If it's not that bad, why is this the standard pattern? Stop deceiving yourself. Christian teachers in all the schools, even Christian schools, are following the same patterns because the teachers that go into many Christian schools become credentialed the same way, learn the same dialectical think, the same worldview values, and bring it right into the Christian church. All right? Christian teachers in all the schools are going to have to decide whom it is they are going to serve, which worldview is going to be their driving worldview, and which one they will stop flipping hats on. They have their choice. It's either Jesus Christ or John Dewey, the Holy Spirit or Hegel, the Bible or Bloom's taxonomy. But make your choice and stop jumping back and forth every day between the two worlds. Realize what you are doing. This is important. Some teachers wake up, okay, and there are things. Teachers can make a difference, but they must recognize there's a difference to make. And you have to know what the difference is. If you don't know what's broke, you don't know how to fix it. It's the same as turning the helm. But a lot of us in churches now are just saying, let's move on. There are elders in churches saying, all right, if you can't do it, we can. And we need to look at what the churches are going to do. I wish you could see the movie called 2 Million Minutes. There was a 2 Million Minutes sequel about charter schools in this country. There's a charter school in Tucson, Arizona that has, by the freshman year of high school, is teaching the kids calculus. All right, they're doing college-level calculus in their freshman year of high school, algebra in the grade schools. And you know what they don't do if they can avoid it? They don't hire credentialed teachers. They avoid it. They hire MAs, MS, PhDs, people who maybe not even have degrees, but have 40 years in a particular profession of engineering or whatever, and have real-world hands-on knowledge. These kids are running circles around the other kids, and we can do that in the churches as well. All right? You know, if you can't make a difference in public education, go start a private school. Go start a charter school. Do something different. Why is it that more and more churches don't have schools? You know, for 40 to 50 years, we have been sending our children into secular atheist seminaries and wondering why they keep coming out secular atheists. This is not very hard. We have them for an hour a week. The schools have them for 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's what the early secular humanists said. We're going to control public education, and then we will have the kids for all this period of time. Let's go to how this works in the church, too. Because this slop-think, as I call it, has totally destroyed our ability to do apologetics. Our Sunday school programs are an absolute disaster, all right? We do not train the teachers to teach. When we teach, we do not train in worldview apologetics, meaning what? What is the Christian worldview in areas of politics, law, religion, science, all of these things? What does secular humanism teach? What does Marxism teach? What does the new global paradigm teach? So that they have a contrast, and we give them the biblical and Christian-centered arguments to engage these worldviews which they are going to encounter in school and out in the real world. If you can't send your kids to a school that does that, then doggone it, these churches had better have active, vibrant apologetics programs so when some college professor says something stupid, they can challenge it by asking the hard questions, all right? I tell you what the church does not have, and I was saying this to a friend of ours, one of our elders who's a Marine colonel. I said, we don't have a sense of urgency. You know, we're facing a crisis. We've been facing a crisis for 30 years. Why aren't you doing something, please? Sometimes they don't know what to do. In some churches, the men are taking over and saying, all right, the heck with the elders, the heck with the pastor, we're going to do it. You know, in some cases, they can get the pastor on board. In some cases, the pastor's trying to lead, and the congregation doesn't want to go. In one church in Seattle, the pastor wanted to do this, and all the Christian teachers, public school teachers, threatened to leave the church. And I go, well, that's really academic of them. Let's engage in this. Why? Because, well, they're offended. Okay, and I can't tell you, every time, remember, when somebody says to you now, the Gen Xer, I'm offended, that means you're supposed to shut up. All right? It's not the concept of let's engage, steel on steel. What do you think that proverb means, 27:17? Okay, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. We work at it together. God set it up so that we work at it, and like rough, raw rocks tumbling in a tumbler, our rough points break off, and finally we become smooth and polished, and we have something really hard and worthwhile. They don't want to engage. That's the whole consensus process. It is a process of deceiving and non-engagement. So we have to regain a sense of mission and a sense of urgency. We are not mission-oriented. Okay, we have to save souls, and then we have to train believers to do what? Well, it's a battle. Remember, isn't that what Paul tells us at the end of Ephesians? It's a fight. They don't just, accept Christ and then off they go, your own personal rapture. No, we're here for a while, all right? So there's going to be an attack on your faith and on you. As soon as you become a target in Satan's eyes, you're going to be hit. And the flip side of that is any kind of conversion going on is going to be a worldview battle. We have a nice thing every year called Art on the Green. They close off the main street, and there are all these shops and arts and stuff and everything. And sure enough, there was a group there proselytizing from a Baptist church, I think it was, in Pullman, Washington. And, a guy walks up and hands me a tract. And I always start by saying, no, I don't need that. And so you act sort of like, I'm a non-believer, I'm an atheist, I'm happy, and I don't need your stupid little stuff, So usually, I want to see what they're going to do, And say, well, why is it you believe what you believe anyway? And he starts saying, well, Jesus Christ did this great thing in my heart, and I believe, feel. And I stopped him. I said, stop! Just like that. I interrupted him. Never, 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 never base your faith on a feeling in the heart. Mormons have a burning in the bosom, okay? There are these equal convictions that Buddhists have, and I'm not disparaging Mormons. What I am saying is, okay, or Buddhists, you should always respect everybody else's worldview whenever you're in a worldview conversation, all right? But what I'm saying is, a feeling is not a thing to base your faith upon. Right? Faith is not irrational. For Pete's sake, it was the Christian church that brought Greek logic into the West in the first place, enabling science today. And it came in several waves. The last wave came in with Thomas Aquinas, and it also came in with Orthodox Christians fleeing from Constantinople as a result of the invasion of Islam, that they fled westward and they brought all of these scrolls with them. The concept of logic and learning is as old as the church. And yet we let people in science say, well, science is fact and this is religion. Oh, come on, challenge that stuff, people. You can never balance your faith or back your faith on feeling. Your faith is an extrapolation of what we know logically to be to what we know must be, but we just can't see it yet. And Paul gives us a definition of that as well. It is not an irrational jump. So that's something we have to do. We have to be mission-oriented, and we have to. I can't say this strongly enough. Train the young people in the churches. If you're going to put them into that buzzsaw, you'd better put some Kevlar on them. And we have not been doing that. And I'll be honest and brutally honest. Another verse-by-verse Bible study, just verse by verse, will not do the trick. And I go to a church. I'm in Pastor Paul Benoit's church. And He knows I've said this. Just verse by verse won't do it. The Scripture also says precept on precept. You've got to organize this in their heads to match the target out there. Otherwise, guess what's going to happen? They will wind up there with a jumble of Bible facts in their heads and no idea of how to apply these. It's like giving somebody a terrific sword and saying, well, just swing it around your head and hope you hit it. Maybe you'll hit something. That's not it. There's the sword. How do you use this when you're out there? And what's the opponent going to be slinging? Is he going to have a mace? Is he going to have an axe? Is he going to have a gun? You better know how to disarm that when you go. I want to talk to pastors. Pastors, you have got to start telling the truth regardless of the consequences. If you stop telling the truth because you're afraid of what your congregation is going to do, Paul says in Galatians, have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? If you can't handle the truth now, how are you going to handle the truth through this new paradigm shift that we're going to enter right now? I understand what the cost is. There is a cost of discipleship, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer said. And it cost him death during the Third Reich and the Nazi Empire. You might lose your pastorate or your people. But I'll be real candid. Remember I said I was going to be politically incorrect. It's really time for pastors to man up. All right? It really, really is that time. Stop confusing Christian love with feminine love. Okay? See, that's what we've been told, because when we made this feeling shift, right, that's when all of a sudden you heard all of the psychosocial stuff flood into Christianity. And what we were preached now is feminine love, which is a nurturing, protecting type of love, right, is Christian love. That's where you get the effeminate, wimpy Jesus. But masculine love, and we can tell this. The morning my third son was born, right? He comes out of the womb, so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. They clean him up a bit. They hand him to me, and what did I do? Without even thinking of it, all right, I took the boy and shoved him under my arm like a football and held him like that. It was instinctive for the man to do that. Why? It's protective for running in battle. That's why. All right? Whereas a woman tends to hold the baby this way. See, there's a difference. But when men engage in feminine love, that becomes effeminate love. And that's what too many pastors have had right now. I would tell you a joke, but my wife would never forgive me because she never would. You really need to go to the restroom, don't you? Okay. So every once in a while, have you ever dealt with a pastor when you say, Pastor, we're going to go do this, this, and this, and the pastor says, oh. You can see this. He goes, have you prayed about this? Now he's not interested in the fact that you've prayed, that you're going to pray about. That's an excuse. He's scared by what you're going to propose to do. And I keep having this urge to say, Pastor, do you have any kids? And the pastor, well, yes, I have Bobby and Susie and Jimmy. Well, Pastor, how did that happen? You see, you have to have certain anatomical parts to do that, and you don't have them. Okay? So. Now, that's not bad for Christians to do, because I kid you not, because Paul uses analogies like that, and so does Jeremiah and Isaiah and everything. So that's it. But you really do. It's like, man up. Act like you got a pair. Stand up. Do something. This is a battle, for Pete's sake. Lay people, get your pastors and elders on board. If they won't come, men of your congregation, do it yourself. You need home worldview studies. There are excellent ones out there. Dave Noble has one. Brandon House has one. A small group of us men in the church are going to do one on Sunday mornings now for people, because the people need it as well. Instructions have to come from an apologetic standpoint rather than just biblical exposition. They have to be rooted in biblical exposition, but they must be geared to match the worldviews of today. And that's important. Now, I have no doubt at the end, by the way, I will tell everybody in the Gen X and younger, I'm giving you the benefit of a baby boom education. Number one, you need to stop being offended when someone corrects you and tries to build you up. Two, avoid cliches. Learn to defend your views. People say, I'm offended, and they want to walk out of the conversation. No. You're here to defend your view. In Latin, it used to be called in defenso fidei, in defense of the faith. And you have to battle to find out what is truly true out there. So I've already told you what we can do. Sorry I'm getting into this. I want to tell you something, because I did this talk the way we did it. We put it together, and on the way down here, we totally dismantled it and re-put it together again. I have no doubt many of you who see this might say, well, I'm an angry, misdirected ranter. So be it. That was what the pastor said to Dietrich Bonhoeffer in the 1920s when he was already predicting what the Nazis were going to do. He was right. They were wrong. The church in Germany fell apart. I have a whole teaching on that about the coming persecution of Christians in the West, as to how well the church did in a civilized country under a time of persecution and stress. Not good, because about 80% of the church in Germany, the Christian church, evangelicals and Lutheran, and a lot of the Catholic churches had adopted this dialectical method of higher criticism biblical thinking. And when the storm of another worldview came in, they could not stand, except they folded. All right? You see, I see the worldview storms coming. I see thousands of Christians today in Bible-believing churches whose faith is built on sand, and they need to build it on rock because they are poised to collapse in the storms that are coming. I saw how thousands of Christians in Nazi Germany fell apart. You know, during the Diocletian persecution, it was the last of 7 great persecutions in the early church. It was unexpected. It took the church by storm. A large part of the Roman military had become Christian. By war, as Islam did? No. By peaceful one-on-one proselytism throughout the Roman military. There is the story during the Diocletian persecution of one Roman general in Armenia wanting to purge all the Christians from his ranks. So he stripped them all naked and made them stand on a frozen lake until they froze to death, the whole crowd of them. Famous story of the martyrdom of Christians who were there. But during the Diocletian persecution, Christians who didn't want to stand for their faith could avoid whatever the punishment was, including execution and death, by handing over their copy of the Scriptures. Bishops and priests could do that, pastors, at that time. And they were called by the faithful church traditores. Traditore meaning tradere from trans, meaning across, and dare, to give, to hand over, literally. We derived our modern word, traitor, from that very, very root. After the Diocletian persecution, the debate that raged was whether those Christians that had folded under persecution could even be allowed back in fellowship. Had they committed the unpardonable sin, was the question, and therefore that they were left. All right? My question is, what are you going to do? Will you build your house on relative collective sand and spit in the face of the Word of God? And since the Word of God is Christ, then you're going to spit in Christ. And believe me, this comes fast. And if your worldview is not intact, if you don't understand it now, when that time comes, it comes on you in a heartbeat. At work or wherever it happens to be, you have to make a moral judgment. And it's going to be far worse in the next 10 years here, even in our country and in other countries of the West. So what's it going to be? You're going to build it on sand, or you're going to build it on the Word of God? Or will I hear Jesus say to you on the day when all things are made known, well done, good and faithful servant? The choice is yours. Make it, but make it now. Thank you.